The year was 1923, and nestled deep in the mountains of rural Montana lay a town that time seemed to have forgotten. Ravenshollow was its name, though few outsiders had ever heard of it, and fewer still had reason to visit. The closest railroad stop was 60 miles away, accessible only by treacherous mountain roads that became impassable during the harsh winter months. The town housed exactly 347 souls, each family having carved out their existence from the unforgiving wilderness. Cattle ranchers, wheat farmers, and sheep herders made up the bulk of the population. They were hard-working folk who believed in the values of honest labor, neighborly cooperation, and the Protestant work ethic that had built America. Mayor Henderson, a stout man with graying whiskers, ran the town with an iron fist, wrapped in a velvet glove. Reverend Matthews preached every Sunday at the only church, a small wooden structure with a bell tower that could be heard for miles. The general store was owned by old Pete Morrison, who had arrived with the first settlers and seemed to know everyone's business better than they knew it themselves. Life in Ravenshollow followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought the birthing of calves and lambs. Summer meant long days in the fields. Autumn was harvest time, and winter meant hunkering down to survive until the snow melted. The land was generous to those who worked it hard. The cattle grew fat on mountain grass, the wheat grew golden in the summer sun, and the sheep produced wool so fine that it commanded top prices in the distant cities. But every spring brought the same problem that had plagued the town for years. With so much livestock and so few hands to tend them during the busy farming season, finding reliable help was nearly impossible. The older men were too frail for the demanding work of herding, and the younger men were desperately needed for planting and tending the crops. It was the third week of May when the stranger arrived in Ravenshollow. The morning mist still clung to the mountains when a lone figure emerged from the tree line, walking down the main road with a measured, unhurried pace. He appeared to be in his late 20s, tall and lean, with the weathered look of a man who had spent his life outdoors. His clothes were simple but well maintained, and he carried a worn leather satchel slung across his shoulder. What struck the early risers who spotted him first was not his appearance, but something indefinable about his presence. There was a quality to the way he moved, a purposefulness that seemed at odds with his leisurely pace. His dark eyes seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing of his own thoughts. The stranger made his way directly to Morrison's general store, where a handful of men had already gathered for their morning coffee and gossip. The conversation died as he entered, all eyes turning to study this unexpected visitor. Strangers were rare in Ravenshollow, and those who did pass through usually had obvious business. Cattle buyers, traveling salesmen, or the occasional government official. "Mornin', gentlemen," the stranger said in a voice that carried just a hint of an accent no one could quite place. "Name's Silas. I'm looking for work." Mayor Henderson, who had been discussing the upcoming harvest with the other men, raised an eyebrow. "Work? What kind of work?" "I'm a herder," Silas replied. "Cattle, sheep, whatever needs tending. I heard you folks might have need of someone with my skills." The men exchanged glances. It was true, they had been discussing this very problem for weeks. With the farming season in full swing, they desperately needed someone to watch over the livestock while the owners tended to their crops. But hiring a stranger, especially one who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, was not a decision to be made lightly. "Where you from, son?" asked Reverend Matthews, who had joined the group. Silas's expression remained neutral. "I travel around, go where the work is. References speak for themselves. Healthy animals, no losses, fair prices." This answer didn't satisfy the men's curiosity, but it did address their main concern. In a community where everyone knew everyone else's business, the idea of taking on a complete unknown was unsettling. Yet their need was genuine and pressing. Old Pete Morrison leaned forward. "You got any recommendations? Anyone we can check with?" "Check my work, not my words," Silas replied. "Give me a trial period. If you're not satisfied, you owe me."
After much deliberation and heated discussion among the town's leaders, they decided to give Silas a chance. The terms were modest: room and board in the old shepherd's cabin on the hillside overlooking the town, plus $3 a week and meals provided by the families whose livestock he tended. It was honest work for honest pay, and Silas accepted without haggling. From his very first day, Silas proved to be everything he had claimed and more. He rose before dawn and worked until well after sunset, moving the herds with an almost supernatural understanding of animal behavior. The cattle seemed calmer under his watch. The sheep stayed together without the usual strain, and not a single animal was lost to predators or disease. The townspeople began to take notice. Mayor Henderson, initially skeptical, found himself grudgingly impressed. "Never seen animals respond to anyone like that," he remarked to his wife over dinner. "It's like he speaks their language." Reverend Matthews, too, found himself warming to the stranger. Silas attended Sunday services regularly, sitting quietly in the back pew, and though he rarely spoke, he carried himself with a respectful demeanor that the preacher appreciated. When approached for conversation, Silas was polite but reserved, never volunteering information about his past or his plans for the future. The women of the town, led by Mayor Henderson's wife Martha, began sending extra food to the cabin. Silas accepted these kindnesses graciously, always expressing his gratitude in his soft-spoken manner. Children who encountered him while playing near the grazing areas found him patient and gentle, though he never encouraged their attention or sought their company. As the weeks passed, the initial suspicion gave way to grudging respect, then to something approaching acceptance. The herds had never been healthier or more manageable. Milk production increased, wool quality improved, and the cattle grew fat on the mountain grass under Silas's careful guidance. But it was the subtle changes that some of the more observant townspeople began to notice that would later prove significant. Animals that had once been skittish around strangers now followed Silas with an almost devotional loyalty. Birds seemed to gather wherever he worked, perching silently on fence posts and watching. Even the weather appeared to cooperate with his schedule, with convenient breaks in rainstorms and gentle breezes that kept the animals comfortable. Old Pete Morrison, who prided himself on his ability to read people, found Silas impossible to decipher. "Something about that man," he confided to his wife. "Can't put my finger on it, but it's there. Almost like he's not quite..." "Not quite what?" she asked. Pete shook his head. "Like he's not quite from here. And I don't mean